On the 16th of January, 2026, the British monarchy broke a silence that had endured for nearly a decade. Princess Anne, the most disciplined of Queen Elizabeth's children, entered a closed-door briefing at Clarence House carrying a single red folder. What she revealed would reshape everything the public believed about how Prince Harry entered the royal family. The document existed. British intelligence had compiled it, and the palace had chosen to bury it. This is not a story about scandal. This is a story about deception on a scale most institutions cannot absorb. Between 2008 and 2015, a woman known to the world as a struggling American actress was living a life that bore no resemblance to her public narrative. Private yachts in the Mediterranean, exclusive events in Monaco, Istanbul, and Dubai, accommodations in five-star hotels during peak seasons, monthly expenditures exceeding £200,000 with no verifiable source of income. MI6 documented it all when British intelligence conducted routine vetting on Meghan Markle in autumn of 2016. They encountered something unprecedented, a romantic partner of a senior royal who did not exist in the traditional sense. She was not self-advancing. She was being advanced, deliberately, systematically, by handlers embedded within elite social networks. The classification assigned to her in internal documents was clinical, strategic social placement, a term used by Western intelligence agencies to describe individuals cultivated and positioned into high-power environments for strategic advantage. The placement was not crude, it was sophisticated. It involved a network of facilitators, financial sponsors with ties to Gulf sovereign wealth entities, and intermediaries who operated in the spaces between legitimate business and geopolitical maneuvering. At the center of this network stood Marcus Anderson, official title Global Membership Director of Soho House, unofficial designation handler, a man who paired personalities with power, a man who, according to intelligence files, orchestrated the meeting between Meghan Markle and Prince Harry not as a blind date, but as an engineered encounter. When Princess Anne received these findings in early 2017, she confronted her nephew directly. At Gatcombe Park, behind closed doors, she placed the dossier between them and asked a single question. "Do you believe she reached the crown by accident?" Harry refused to read past the first 3 pages. In a fit of emotion, he tore the executive summary apart and declared his love was not negotiable. The palace, already damaged by decades of public criticism over their treatment of Diana, chose silence over confrontation. Charles hoped to preserve family peace. William voiced reservations but was overruled. Anne retained her copy of the file and waited. The waiting lasted 9 years, but evidence has a way of surfacing. The diamonds helped. Specifically, a pair of chopard earrings valued at £500,000, worn at a Fijian state dinner in 2018. When palace aides questioned their origin, Meghan insisted they were borrowed from a jeweler. The intelligence files told a different story. The earrings were a gift. The sender was documented as a Saudi-linked intermediary. The transaction routed through diplomatic channels. The timing significant, delivered just before Meghan began dating Prince Harry, just before she entered the royal family, just before she could no longer accept such gifts without creating international incidents. To those inside British intelligence, this was not a fashion choice. This was a closing signal, a thank you gift from a world that had sponsored her rise, delivered before she moved into a new orbit. When Meghan wore those diamonds at a public televised event, just 2 weeks after the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, alarm bells rang across the palace. She had been asked not to wear them. She wore them anyway. To Princess Anne, that was not forgetfulness. That was defiance. A refusal to sever ties with the power brokers who had facilitated her ascent. The confrontations that followed were brutal. Anne told Harry he did not know who she was. Harry accused Anne of xenophobia. The conversation ended with Anne's final statement: "No woman earns those diamonds without earning something else along the way." They did not speak in person again before the Sussexes departed Britain in 2020. As the years passed, additional evidence emerged: travel manifests, customs records, satellite imagery placing Meghan at events she never publicly acknowledged attending, financial trails connecting her to individuals operating in the space between legitimate wealth and geopolitical strategy. The palace maintained its silence, but on the 16th of January, 2026, that silence fractured irrevocably. Princess Anne, now in her mid-70s, with nothing left to lose and everything to protect, entered a briefing with senior royal advisors and members of the Privy Council. She carried the same red folder. She opened it. She looked at the assembled group and spoke words that shattered decades of institutional restraint. "It exists. The file is real, and we tried to warn him." Within hours, the phrase was trending globally. Within days, the intelligence community had begun offering corroborating statements. Within weeks, what had been whispered in diplomatic circles for a decade became undeniable institutional reality. The House of Windsor had not rejected Meghan Markle because of her race or her background or her media profile. The institution had flagged her because British intelligence had documented a pattern of strategic placement by foreign actors seeking proximity to the British throne. Prince Harry, the man who spent years portraying his family as racist and outdated, was now forced to confront a possibility far more devastating than institutional prejudice. He had not rescued anyone. He had been the final transaction in someone else's power play. In Montecito, sources reported that Harry entered a state of profound psychological crisis. He stopped speaking. He stopped eating. He isolated himself for hours at a time. A man who had built his entire post-royal identity on the narrative of escaping a dysfunctional institution discovered that the woman he sacrificed everything for had never been what he believed. Marcus Anderson disappeared. His social media accounts deactivated. His scheduled appearances canceled. His office at Soho House issued automated responses citing indefinite leave. To observers of intelligence operations, this was not coincidence. This was containment. When the handler's role becomes exposed, the handler vanishes. Meghan Markle issued no statement. Her legal team, previously aggressive in pursuing defamation cases, remained silent. Her communications channels, normally active and carefully managed, went dark. The silence from a couple known for controlling narratives was interpreted across diplomatic circles as acknowledgement by omission. They knew the dossier was not speculation. It was a matter of institutional record. The palace, meanwhile, did not celebrate its vindication. There was no triumphal statement, no official acknowledgement of being right, no demand for apology or restitution. Instead, under William's direction, new protocols were implemented. Mandatory background reviews by MI5 and GCHQ for all romantic partners of senior royals. Registry systems for foreign-linked luxury gifts. Restructured access clauses giving the monarch veto authority over engagement announcements tied to unresolved intelligence flags. This was not punishment directed at Harry. This was protection designed to prevent future strategic infiltration of the royal institution. Princess Anne, consistent with her nature, made no further public statements. She simply returned to her duties. She did not seek credit. She did not demand recognition or apology. She had raised the alarm once. She had been dismissed. She had been vindicated. And now she waited to see what her nephew would do with the truth. For Harry, the choice was paralyzing. The narrative that had sustained him for a decade had collapsed. The woman he believed he rescued had never needed rescuing. The family he condemned had been attempting to protect him from something he refused to see. Freedom, it turned out, was not about escape. It was about discernment, and Anne, the quietest of them all, had possessed that discernment from the beginning. The morning after Princess Anne's revelation, a peculiar silence descended upon the institutions that governed Britain. No press conferences were scheduled, no official statements were prepared for parliamentary consideration, no emergency sessions convened to discuss the constitutional implications of what had just been confirmed. Instead, there existed only the profound quiet of an institution digesting a truth it had spent nearly a decade attempting to contain. But beneath that surface silence, machinery was moving with calculated precision. Within the Privy Council offices at Westminster, senior advisors began implementing what would become known internally as the Windsor Firewall Protocol. This was not a reactive measure hastily constructed in response to immediate crisis. Rather, it represented a formalization of protective mechanisms that had been theoretically developed and discussed for years, but never formally activated until this moment demanded action. The protocol incorporated several revolutionary changes to how the royal family would henceforth vet potential romantic partners of senior royals. Previously, background investigations had been conducted primarily through traditional security channels, focusing on criminal history, financial irregularities, and obvious reputational liabilities. The new framework was fundamentally different. It would involve comprehensive intelligence analysis from both MI5 and GCHQ, the British Surveillance and Signals Intelligence Agency. These organizations possessed capabilities far beyond standard security vetting. They could trace financial movements across international banking systems. They could identify patterns of movement and association that suggested strategic placement rather than organic relationship development. They could assess whether an individual's lifestyle exceeded their documented income sources in ways that might indicate sponsorship by foreign actors or organized interests. More controversially, the protocol included provisions for what legal advisors termed foreign actor liaison assessment. This represented an attempt to determine whether a romantic partner had been deliberately introduced into the royal family's orbit by state or non-state actors seeking to gain leverage, intelligence access, or cultural influence within British institutions. The implementation of such measures raised immediate constitutional questions. Privacy advocates and civil liberties organizations began questioning whether the monarchy had the authority to conduct such invasive investigations on the romantic partners of adult family members. Legal scholars debated whether the protocol violated European human rights conventions. But within palace circles, the philosophical justification was straightforward. The institution's survival depended upon preventing future infiltration. One senior advisor, speaking during a confidential briefing to senior royals at Sandringham, articulated the reasoning with characteristic bluntness. "We allowed ourselves to be penetrated once. We will not permit it again. The cost was nearly incalculable. The remedy, whatever its constitutional complications, is justified by institutional necessity." Prince William, now increasingly assuming leadership roles in strategic institutional matters, greenlit the protocol's implementation without hesitation. Catherine, operating in her increasingly influential role as advisor on institutional communications and strategic positioning, endorsed the measure while suggesting that its existence remained confidential rather than publicly announced. "We implement the protection," she reportedly advised, "but we do not advertise the vulnerability it addresses." The protocol's second major component involved the creation of a comprehensive registry system for tracking all luxury gifts, financial arrangements, and hospitality offers extended to members of the royal family. Specifically, the system was designed to flag any gifts or arrangements with potential foreign government or foreign wealth connections. This represented a dramatic shift in royal practice, which had traditionally operated under assumptions of discretion and gentlemanly honor regarding such matters. Historical precedent existed for such concerns. Various members of the royal family throughout history had received gifts from foreign dignitaries, international business figures, and wealthy individuals seeking to establish or strengthen relationships with the institution. But the Saudi dossier had revealed a more troubling dynamic: gifts that arrived not as isolated gestures of goodwill, but as coordinated elements within a broader strategic placement operation. The registry system would require full documentation of gift provenance, estimated valuation, and any potential foreign government connections. Items accepted without proper vetting would be subject to removal from royal use and, in certain cases, confiscation for security analysis. More radically, the protocol included provisions restructuring what palace lawyers termed marital access clauses. These represented formalized mechanisms giving the reigning monarch veto authority over formal engagement announcements or marriage ceremonies involving senior members of the royal family if unresolved intelligence concerns remained outstanding regarding the proposed spouse. This provision proved extraordinarily controversial even within palace circles. Critics noted that it represented an unprecedented exercise of monarchical authority over the personal romantic choices of adult family members. Constitutional scholars debated whether such provisions could withstand legal challenge, yet proponents argued that the alternative, permitting potentially compromised individuals to marry into the royal family, represented an unacceptable security and institutional risk. Princess Anne, while not directly involved in drafting the protocol, reportedly reviewed its provisions and offered a single comment to Prince William: "This is the price of vulnerability. Institutions that are penetrated must rebuild their walls. We are rebuilding ours." Meanwhile, in California, the personal consequences of Anne's revelation were manifesting in ways the palace had not anticipated and could not control. Prince Harry's psychological response to the confirmation of the Saudi dossier evolved through stages that observers close to him described as resembling the classical grief response. Initial denial gave way to anger, which in turn transformed into a kind of profound disorientation. For years, Harry had constructed a comprehensive personal narrative in which he functioned as the protagonist. He was the brave prince who had escaped an outdated, emotionally repressive institution. He was the man who had prioritized love over duty, personal authenticity over institutional expectation. He was the defender of a woman targeted by media prejudice and institutional racism. This narrative had justified all his subsequent actions, his public criticism of the royal family, his decision to step back from royal duties, his commercial partnerships, his memoir, his media projects. But with Anne's confirmation of the Saudi dossier, that narrative had been fundamentally destabilized. The premise upon which his entire post-royal identity rested, that he had seen truth others could not see, that his judgment regarding Meghan had been sound, had been revealed as tragically, catastrophically flawed. According to sources with access to his inner circle, Harry's response was not initially anger directed at Meghan, but rather profound confusion directed at himself. How had his judgment been so compromised? How had he failed to recognize patterns that British intelligence had documented years earlier? How had he spent nearly a decade defending and promoting a woman whose integration into the royal family had been orchestrated by foreign actors seeking to gain leverage over the British throne? One former security official who had maintained occasional contact with members of Harry's household described the emotional atmosphere in the Montecito residence in the days immediately following Anne's statement as eerily quiet, like a home where someone had experienced profound trauma but was not yet capable of acknowledging or processing that trauma. Harry reportedly spent extended periods in isolation. He refused meals. He did not respond to communications from his legal representatives. He did not engage in the normal rhythms of daily life that had previously structured his California existence. Security staff, accustomed to managing paparazzi and external threats, found themselves managing an internal psychological crisis for which they possessed neither training nor appropriate protocols. One official reportedly contacted palace security to request guidance on how to respond if Harry exhibited signs of self-harm or severe psychological decompensation. The response from London was clinical and institutional. Monitor but do not intervene. This is a matter between him and his own counsel. Meghan, meanwhile, had been attending a branding and women's leadership summit in Los Angeles at the precise moment Anne's statement was being delivered at Clarence House. She received notification of the statement through her communications team, apparently while in a meeting with potential corporate partners. According to attendees at the summit who subsequently spoke to journalists, Meghan's demeanor underwent an immediate and visible transformation. She reportedly excused herself from meetings, canceled scheduled panel appearances, and departed the venue within 2 hours. Her communications team issued no statement. Her legal representatives offered no response. Her social media accounts, normally active and carefully managed, fell silent. This silence from a woman who had built her post-royal profile on aggressive narrative management and proactive media engagement was itself a form of communication. To observers within diplomatic and intelligence circles, the silence suggested not confidence, but rather a recognition that any attempt to defend against or refute the dossier's findings would only amplify the story's impact. More significantly, no apparent contact occurred between Meghan and Prince Harry in the immediate aftermath of Anne's revelation. This absence of private communication between spouses was interpreted by palace observers as potentially indicating a fundamental rupture in their relationship. One senior royal advisor commented privately, "When spouses stop communicating at moments of profound crisis, you are witnessing either the end of a relationship or a relationship so damaged that normal emotional processing is no longer possible." The disappearance of Marcus Anderson proved equally significant to institutional observers. Within 6 hours of Anne's briefing, Anderson's social media accounts had been deactivated. Within 24 hours, his office at Soho House Global had issued an automated response indicating he was taking indefinite leave. Within 48 hours, he had reportedly departed London and was believed to be traveling internationally. For intelligence professionals, this sequence of events required no interpretation. A handler whose operational role has been exposed does not remain visible. Disappearance is the only rational response. The fact that Anderson's disappearance occurred so rapidly suggested that he possessed advanced knowledge of Anne's intention to make the dossier public, or that he was operating under standing instructions to implement containment protocols in precisely such circumstances. Several intelligence analysts noted that Anderson's swift departure likely meant that evidence of his own involvement in the placement operation, communications, financial records, travel documentation, would be difficult to obtain. By positioning himself outside British jurisdiction, Anderson had effectively insulated himself from potential legal consequences that might otherwise have followed the public acknowledgement of his role in orchestrating Meghan's introduction to Prince Harry. The palace made no move to attempt to locate or question Anderson. No diplomatic channels were activated to facilitate his return or compel his testimony. This deliberate choice to permit Anderson's departure was itself strategic. To actively pursue Anderson would be to further publicize the entire matter, to invite continued media scrutiny, to suggest that the palace viewed the affair as requiring ongoing investigation or remediation. Better, from an institutional perspective, to permit the handler to vanish. Better to treat the entire operation as historical, something that had occurred in the past, had been addressed through the implementation of protective protocols, and would not be permitted to recur. Better to move forward with the appearance of institutional composure and continuity. Yet behind this calculated public restraint, other processes were underway. Within the Foreign Office, diplomatic cables were being drafted regarding potential intelligence sharing matters with allied services regarding the broader operation of which Meghan's placement had been merely one element. Within MI6, assessments were being updated regarding the sophistication and scope of foreign actor efforts to penetrate British institutional structures. Within the Privy Council, historical records were being reviewed to determine whether other romantic relationships involving senior royals might warrant retrospective intelligence analysis. The full scope of this institutional reckoning would remain confidential, but the fact of it, the systematic assessment of institutional vulnerability, the implementation of protective measures, the strategic recalibration of how the monarchy would govern its own boundaries represented a fundamental shift in how the royal institution understood and managed its relationship to the external world. Princess Anne, meanwhile, had returned to her normal schedule of royal engagements and charitable work. She attended a ceremony honoring military veterans. She presided over a horse trials competition. She delivered remarks at a charity function supporting conservation efforts. To external observers, nothing in her demeanor suggested that she had just triggered a sequence of events that would reshape how the British monarchy functioned. This was exactly as Anne had planned. Her role was not to manage the aftermath of her revelation. Her role was to speak the truth once, permit the institutional machinery to process that truth, and then return to the business of serving the institution to which she had devoted her entire life. One senior royal official, reflecting on Anne's approach in a private conversation, noted, "She is the only one of them who truly understands that institutions survive not through managing crises, but through absorbing consequences and continuing." Anne absorbed the consequence of being right, but dismissed. She permitted the institution to dismiss her, and now she simply continues, vindicated but unrewarded, exactly as she always intended. In the aftermath of institutional revelation, there exists only the weight of truths that cannot be unspoken. Prince Harry, once the boy who believed he was rescuing a princess, discovers he was merely a pawn in someone else's calculated strategy. The woman he defended with ferocious intensity was never in need of defense. She was an instrument, sophisticated, strategic, positioned with precision by handlers operating in the shadows between nations and wealth. The palace moves forward as palaces always do, not with triumph or vindication, but with the quiet work of institutional repair. New protocols are implemented, new boundaries are drawn, new vigilance replaces the trust that was once believed sufficient. Princess Anne, vindicated but unrewarded, returns to her work. She was right. She was dismissed. She was right again. And now she simply continues, exactly as she always intended. In Montecito, the mansion that once symbolized freedom now represents only the ruins of a carefully constructed illusion. The gates that promised escape have become a prison of consequence. And somewhere in the spaces between nations, handlers have vanished into operational obscurity, leaving behind only the evidence of their work and the wreckage of the lives they touched. The House of Windsor endures, as it always has, by accepting uncomfortable truths and continuing forward regardless. Not with bitterness, not with blame, simply with the understanding that institutions survive not by avoiding infiltration, but by absorbing it, learning from it, and ensuring it never occurs again. The boy who ran from duty now understands what his family knew all along. Freedom without discernment is simply another form of captivity, and sometimes the people who stop you are the only ones actually telling the truth.